In the first week of May 2020, I had a rather violent dogman encounter. Due to reasons that I will explain in my story, I'm not comfortable with giving my name or the details of exactly where this happened. Although, I am the main participant in this encounter. The experience was shared with a dozen or more people in one way or another. My hope is that one of the others that was there that night, who has more balls than I do, will hear this and be brave to come forward publicly, or at least release some of the pictures taken that night. Here we go. I'm a pretty normal guy, living in the suburbs of Delaware, on the border of southeastern Pennsylvania. I'm a lover of the outdoors, and in the past few years, I have not had the time to really get out into nature like I should, and get my much-needed dose of the natural world. In 2019, I opened my own online business. My business struggled for the first year, but then due to COVID-19 and the whole world being stuck at home on their computers, my sales tripled the first half of 2020 and continues to blow up to this day. I have 2 kids who are now very responsible and trustworthy teenagers. My girlfriend is a nurse at a local hospital and is considered an essential worker, so the pandemic has kept her very busy this year. I turned 40 this year as well, and for the first time in my adult life, I had some time on my hands, and I was itching to get away from civilization. I have an internet hotspot router built into my SUV. It works almost anywhere, no matter how remote. So, with a laptop, I figured I could work from the road, take a few days to go fishing, breathe some fresh air. Neither of my teenagers were interested in joining me, and like I said, my girlfriend was far too busy with work. So, I took my best friend with me, a 120-pound pit bull lab mix named Pete. He makes a great camping dog. He's incredibly lazy, and I never have to worry about him running off to chase deer or anything. He will lay on his blanket next to the fire all day and night, unless I make him head out with me. But as I have learned while camping with Pete, if coyotes, bears, or any other predators come around, he snaps out of his laziness and protects camp. Despite his easygoing demeanor, Pete is pretty intimidating, as he is 120 pounds of solid muscle with no fat, which always blows my mind because of how lazy and inactive he is. I try to go camping at least once a year, and when I do, I usually rough it with a small tent and whatever else I can carry on my back. This time, I decided that I wanted to have as many comforts of home and really pamper myself. So I hitched my 10-foot enclosed cargo trailer to my very large SUV, filled it with all the things I would want to be really comfy. I brought my full-sized backyard grill, a 12x12 pop-up canopy, an air mattress, 2 large coolers full of food, and a fancy 6-person tent. The campground I decided to go to is a large one, and it is mostly used by the RV kind of crowd. But on the far end right, next to the best fishing area, they have half a dozen or so, just plain old campsites, no power or water hookups. My campsite was bordered by about 50 yards of thick woods that separated my camp from a large, fast-moving stream that is well known to be one of the best trout fishing spots in the entire state. On the other side of the stream is a steep mountain side, covered in rock overhangs and small caves. It is a beautiful area, and I love falling asleep to the sound of water. I set up the camp so that my SUV trailer and pop-up canopy make a sort of U-shape and block most of the view into my area from all the rest of the campers. I rented my campsite for a full week, starting on Friday, May 1st, which was the first day that the state opened up the state parks and campgrounds to the public since the pandemic shut down in March. I arrived at the campground about midday on Friday. The place was packed. I spent most of the day getting my campsite set up and getting to know my temporary neighbors, cooking ribeye steaks, burgers, and vegetables on the grill. The weather in central Pennsylvania in early May time is pretty much perfect, so I decided to sleep in the tent each night with Pete and turned my trailer into my mobile office where I kept my computer, internet goods, mailing packages, and even a printer for printing postage. This way, I could work an hour or so each morning, get my orders packed up, and drive 20 minutes into the nearest town once every few days to get my orders shipped out. I remember thinking that I wish I could convince my girlfriend and kids to just sell everything and move into the woods to live, just like this. The weekend was crazy busy at the campground, and the creek was lined with fishermen as far as the eye could see. So, I decided to do some hiking and exploring into the vast surrounding wilderness with Pete, instead of fighting 10 people for the same one fish all day long. It felt great to get out to where I belong, the woods. The only negative was that it rained on and off all weekend while I was hiking. But to be honest, when you camp in Pennsylvania, you should expect to get rained on quite regularly. On the afternoon of Sunday, May 3rd, the campground cleared out fast, and by sundown, there were only a few active campsites left. I had gotten to know the 2 guys in the campsite directly next to mine, so we hung out for a few hours every night while I drank hot tea, and they smoked joints like they were cigarettes. Needless to say, they were always hungry and seemed pleased to have me next door with my full-sized grill and enough food to feed a small army. For the next few days, I worked online, fished the creek, and explored the mountains of the area on foot with my dog. We also liked to just walk around the campground itself, stop to talk with scattered campers who were there during the weekdays. On Tuesday afternoon, a few of them told me about a black bear who had made his way into the more accessible side of the campground and even raided their camps the night before. This had me a little bit concerned because I had a full-sized grill just sitting out in the open at my camp and had been cooking delicious food for days on end. I debated putting the grill inside of my enclosed trailer at night, but sadly, laziness got the best of me, and I left it out. Central Pennsylvania has a rather large black bear population. I was already aware of this. So at night, I slept with a Mossberg Maverick 88 12-gauge shotgun, loaded with double-aught buckshot in the tent with Pete, and just in case a rogue bear posed a danger to us, I had forgotten to pack my Ruger Red Hawk 44 Magnum for hiking. So, while out in the woods, I had to rely on my Smith & Wesson Shield 45 ACP that I already had on my hip when we left home. It wasn't ideal, but I figured it was better than nothing. On the night of Tuesday, May 5th, my new friends and I cooked up some delicious barbecue chicken thighs, baked beans, and baked some potatoes wrapped in aluminum foil in my fire pit. They produced a small bottle of vodka as well, and we made a few orange soda spiked drinks to go with our fancy campsite dinner. All the food and drinks combined with too much fun had worn us out a little early, so we parted ways and got ourselves prepared to crash for the night. A night that would prove to be the most terrifying night of our lives. At about 10 p.m., I loaded 4 shells of buckshot into my shotgun, got my tent all squared away, and lie down in the tent with my dog next to me on his bed and blanket. I put some Citizen Journalist news on my phone, put one headphone in my right ear, and kept my left ear clear to listen to my surroundings and to enjoy the sounds of nature. My tent was pitched close to the tree line, with the rear of the tent facing the woods. The noise of the frogs and insects at night was super loud and is kind of like a song that puts me to sleep better than any lullaby ever could. The next thing I remember is waking up, my eyes popping open to some kind of hollow metallic noise outside my campsite. I lie there, perfectly still, with my heart slamming from a quick spike of adrenaline, flooding all my veins. Then a bang. I heard the lid on my grill slam shut. I had stuck a fairly bright solar-powered motion light to the side of my trailer that lit up my small U-shaped courtyard area of vehicles and tents. My tent was facing the open part of the U, and I could see that my motion light was on, and someone, or something, was moving around my camp casting shadows as it went. I looked at Pete to my right. He was still lying down, but his head was up, and his eyes were as big as ping-pong balls. He was clearly hearing what I was, but I found it strange that he was silent. It was then that I noticed the usual deafening noise of frogs and insects in the woods behind me. It wasn't there. Then, I heard whatever it was breathing. It was a hoarse, deep breathing that I thought to myself, bear. I could hear it walking around. Thump, thump, thump. And next, I heard it at my trailer, pulling at the side door, trying to get inside. So I sat up, grabbed my shotgun. One thing about black bears is that they are not the bravest animals, and any man-made noise will almost always make them run for their lives. So I racked the slide of my shotgun as loud as I could and chambered a shell. Instead of running off, the creature stopped moving and went silent. I could just feel the fear building up inside of me as I pretty much held my breath and listened. To my horror, it, whatever it was now, began walking toward my tent. It was then that I saw its shadow take shape as it drew closer. It was on 2 feet, and apparently huge. I sat there in terror and disbelief as it came right up to the front of my tent, breathing like a giant monster. I said out loud, "Whoever you are, I have a 12 gauge pointed right at you, so you had better sound off who you are." Right then, it leaned forward, right up to my tent, and let out the most terrifying, deep growl I've ever heard in my life. At that moment, Pete whined softly and cowered his head down. It was then that the shadow of its head was clearly visible. It had the head of a giant wolf with 2 pointed ears. As it was growling at me, I could hear my neighbors talking to each other. One of them shined a flashlight at the creature. When the light hit the side of the creature's face, I saw the eyes light up, just like golden LED lights. It turned its face toward the flashlight, and I could hear the man gasp and exclaim. Then, it turned its attention back to me and growled again. I decided that if I didn't do something, this thing was going to kill us. So, I lie back onto my sleeping bag, took aim at the shadow of the monster's head, and pulled the trigger. What followed was complete and total pandemonium. The monster screamed and roared at the same time. It was like the death scream of a woman, mixed with the roar of a big lion. Pete, finally snapping out of his fear, jumped up and began barking furiously. The thing ran off, and from what I could tell from the loud thump, it ran straight into my trailer. I clambered up, quickly unzipping my tent, and poked my head outside to see. It got up on its feet and then ran right into the picnic table and did a flip onto the ground. It started grabbing its face, thrashing around. I could see there was blood everywhere on the trailer. I jumped out of the tent while chambering another shell. I aimed as best I could, with my entire body shaking violently. And right as it started to get up, I shot at it a second time. I'm not entirely sure that I hit it with the second shot. It stood straight up, and I pumped the gun and shot again. The third shot dropped it again. I was so terrified and taken aback by how tall it was when it stood up that I tripped over my own feet, falling backwards. Just then, I hear more gunfire erupting behind me, turning to see my neighbor unloading a large revolver into this werewolf-looking thing at maybe 20 yards. The creature was on its side and was kind of running in circles on the ground, gurgling and spraying blood. As it was doing this death spiral on the ground, it was moving closer to me, so I tried to pump the gun again and was shaking so bad that it took 3 attempts before the last shell even chambered. I just pointed the shot without aiming and could see the hump on the back of its neck rip open, spraying flesh everywhere. I was really close to it at this point. The monster stopped flipping out, and its limbs were twitching, while its head remained fully animated and flopping back and forth for at least another 10 seconds. I crawled quickly backwards, away from it, and tried to stand up. I realized that once I stood up, that I had been holding my breath the whole time, and when I got to my feet, my vision started to go black, and I fell over again. My new friend ran up, grabbed my arms, and began pulling me hard, backwards, away from the monster. I stood up, shaking badly, and looked at the guy with the revolver. His eyes were huge and full of terror. When I began looking around, there was at least 5 other people showing up there, with the same wild-eyed expression. I saw that at least 3 of them had come over with their guns. People were yelling, asking each other what happened, and checking to see if I was injured. I had blood on my clothes and my face. It all happened so quickly, but as is often told by people facing traumatic events, it appeared like it was slow motion. My dog was still barking, going crazy, so I did my best to calm him down. When I hugged him, he was shaking as much as I was. Before long, a small crowd had formed, and people were on their phones calling 911. After a minute or so, a few guys and myself approached the thing as it lay there, still occasionally twitching. We all stood over it, saying, "What is that thing?" over and over. Eventually, we all started saying, "It's a werewolf," in disbelief. All at once, people began taking pictures with their phones. Mine was still in the tent. The wolf man was dead. The top half of its head was basically gone, including both of its eyes and the top of its snout. I assume that that was the first shot that I made from the tent. The front of its neck was completely shredded, and the back of its neck was missing a large chunk of meat. Other than that, it was pretty much impossible to see exactly what other injuries that it had sustained, as it was completely covered from head to toe with blood. But we were all pretty sure that it had taken a buckshot or a .357 Magnum to the chest as well. There was a small river of blood running through the camp, right past my tent, from the puddle that surrounded this beast. Yeah, there was a lot of blood. It was on its side, and after a few minutes, we summoned the courage to grab some big sticks and flip it onto its back. It most definitely was a male, as it had a huge set of scrotum and testicles, bigger than my fists. It was huge. We never measured it, but it was longer than any man I had ever seen. It had dog-like legs, weird-shaped paws with a kind of small heel for feet. Looking back, I'm impressed that I was able to balance such a big, heavy body on 2 feet so small. It had a really skinny lower legs, pretty thick upper legs. It had arms pretty much like a human with long fingers that had filthy-looking claws, roughly 4 inches long. I noticed it was missing the top half of a finger from the battle. This thing had a stench around it that was unbearable, like feces, fermented dog urine, and a 3-week-old dead skunk carcass combined into one unpleasant odor. Although its head strongly resembled that of a huge canid, the teeth did not. Its upper and lower jaws sported nothing but bug-interlocking sharp teeth, like those of a crocodile. No sharp molars in the rear of its mouth, like normal dogs do. Then, the second wave of terror hit all of us at once. The howling of multiple creatures sounded off in the direction of the mountain, just behind the creek. That's when my blood ran cold, and I could see the same big-eyed look go over everybody's face. We all knew exactly what it was. We also all knew that it meant we might be in big trouble. I ran to my tent and clumsily loaded my shotgun with a full 5 rounds, and grabbed my .45 as well, clipped it to my side inside my waistband, also grabbing my phone. All of a sudden, everyone was done looking at the werewolf and was looking at each other and into the woods in the direction that the howling came from. The numerous howls kept up for a few minutes, and to our relief, seemed to be getting further and further away. The police, game wardens, and paramedics showed up, all at once. I could see from the flashing lights that they had blocked the entrance to the campground, up the hill, off in the distance. The cops were just as surprised and freaked out as we were when they first saw the creature. The 2 game wardens looked worried and not surprised. They told everyone to not take any pictures and made everybody clear the general area. The wardens were both on their phones almost the whole time from then on. The paramedics cleared everyone and tried to get me to agree to go to the hospital to get checked out. I refused. The only injury that I had was to my hearing, as I was now half deaf for a few days from all the gunfire and noise. The paramedics were also very silent, looking worried, much like the game wardens, like they knew something. The police took my shotgun and the revolver from my neighbor. They let me keep my .45. They made everyone else put their guns away, and anyone who was there rounded up for questioning. Everybody was told to stay off their phones, which was not much of a problem, as only a few people's phones got even any signal anyway at that campground. When I asked the game warden what was going on, what that thing was, they told me they did not know, but that it looks like some kind of mutated bear or large unknown canine. A few hours later, an SUV, fully black, loaded with guys, showed up. They were all carrying large Glocks, dressed in cargo pants and t-shirts. They immediately took me and the others who were involved aside and began questioning. They told me that they were with the Federal Fish and Game, and they were very interested in the howling we heard after the battle occurred. They must have asked me 10 times about where it was, how close it sounded, and what it sounded like, etc. They also repeated to me about 100 times that I was not to tell anybody what happened, and that they would get to the bottom of things and find out what I had encountered. They told me to tell anyone who asked about my trailer that I had to shoot an aggressive black bear. I assume they told my neighbor and anybody else who was on the scene to say the same thing. They made us open our phones, go through our photos, delete the pictures we took, one at a time. They also told me that if any pictures were to come out of the creature, that it would spell trouble for anybody who has them. They threatened me with all kinds of trouble if this got out. They did not try to pretend that I was seeing things. They point blank and politely asked me to not talk about it, and to lie about the trailer damage. It would seem that I was asleep for only about 2 hours before this dogman showed up. By about 4 a.m., the officials had already gotten to everybody in the campground, and I assume the other people were told it was a bear and made to pack up and get ready to go. They said it was not safe, and they had to close the campground until they were sure it was fully safe. After the remaining pieces of the dogman were bagged and tagged in a small fire truck and was brought in, all the blood was hosed off my trailer. Vehicle, the tables, everything else was all hosed off. Then a few guys wiped down my trailer and vehicle with soapy water. Regular old duct tape was put over the holes in my trailer, and they took my tent, bloody clothes, bloody slippers, as evidence, along with my shotgun. Right before I left, they gave me back my shotgun, wiped down and unloaded. They told me to fill my tank at the closest town and to drive straight home without stopping once. They were serious. They repeated this 3 times. Since all of this, I have learned everything I can about what I encountered. I listened to Dogman and Wolfman encounter stories day and night, and that is how I came across your channel. I figured it only made sense to reach out to you. I am amazed that the authorities are able to keep such a noisy event with so many witnesses under wraps. I have been searching for anybody who came forward or anything about the campground closing in the news. Nothing. I don't even know if anybody's been silenced. Look, I'm not interested in putting myself out there to the public. Truth be told, I'm almost as scared as the agents as I am the dogmen. But all in all, they seem genuinely concerned for my well-being. I have some advice for anybody who decides to camp overnight in the wilderness of Pennsylvania. Bring some decent firepower with you, and your dog, too, if you've got one.